And in the interest of giving you some insight and then allowing you to ask questions, we won't run it as an actual exercise, but I will mimic the exercise process, okay? So this is the background that I give people in an executive MBA class. I say, your manager has asked you to urgently take 5 photocopies of one detailed handwritten sheet. You must specifically use a photocopier. You're not allowed to use a phone. So a photocopier is a machine you put a document on and you press a button. Now, they're typically housed in libraries, for example. Now, there is a queue at the photocopier. Your need is urgent. You need to urgently copy these 5 pages. What do you have to say to the person ahead of you to persuade them to let you pass? Now, when I run this exercise with executive MBAs, I give them 4 or 5 minutes to work out what to say, and it's usually a lot of fun. People come up with these crazy scenarios where they say they're going to take the contact details of everybody in front of them and follow up and offer to buy them lunch or send them flowers, or they give these scenarios where they say, you know, somebody like, I'm going to get fired, my boss is going to be furious if you don't let me go ahead, and they come up with all of these kinds of scenarios in order to influence people to let them go ahead in the queue. But this experiment was actually run, and it was run in 1978, which is why you have to use a photocopier. And in this experiment, a series of people went to libraries and they stood at the end of queues at photocopiers and they said, excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the copy machine? Polite, simple, direct, no reasons, to the point. How many people said yes? 60% of people. More than half the people they asked agreed to let them go ahead in the queue in order to copy 5 pages. Were they able to increase the compliance rates by adding a logical reason? Well, by adding a reason, the compliance rate increased to 93%. Here's the reason. Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the copy machine because I have to make copies? Stay with me for a minute. That doesn't sound like a great reason. So again, but we got a 93% compliance rate by just using this reason. So let's try a different reason instead. How about one that actually makes sense? Like, excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the copy machine because I'm in a rush? At that point, we'd already reached maximum compliance and there was no statistically significant difference between these last 2 statements. I need to make copies is not really a very good reason. Presumably, everybody who's in the queue to a photocopier is there to make copies. And so it sort of asks the question, like, why would people respond in this way? That's kind of strange. First of all, 60% of people agree just because you ask. 93% agree because you said you needed to make copies. Well, one of the ways we can understand better what goes on in an experiment is when we change one of the variables. And so what would happen if we tried the exact same approach, but this time with 20 pages? So in the second set of experiments, the people, the Confederates they're called, the people going around to libraries and asking people if they could get ahead in a queue, tried the same approach. Excuse me, I have 20 pages. May I use the copy machine? Now, one thing that's astounding is that almost a quarter of people actually said yes, which proves that people can be an awful lot nicer than you think they are, at least they were in 1978. But 24% is a long way down from the 60% we achieved earlier. Let's see if we can increase the 24% using the kind of nonsensical reason that we tried last time. Excuse me, I have 20 pages. May I use the copy machine because I have to make copies? They're not falling for it this time, are they? 24%, we've gone nowhere. It's not any better than it was before. Turns out people have cottoned on to the fact that this is a pretty silly reason. And then finally, it was possible for them to increase the compliance rate to 42% by saying, because I'm in a rush. But please note that in every case, the compliance rate was lower than what it was when a person was asking to make 5 copies. What we can see here is that when the number of copies a person is asking to make in order to go ahead increases from 5 to 20, we see a big drop in compliance rate. What we also see is that as the inconvenience you're causing to another person, so asking them to wait while you copy 20 pages is a much bigger inconvenience than asking them to wait while you copy 5 pages. What we can see here is that you have to work harder to get people to say yes. So let's just summarize all of this and ask, well, what have we learned overall? And the first key takeaway from this experiment is that low stakes decisions, now I'm using that term low stakes decision to mean something that isn't high cost, it doesn't inconvenience me that much, it's not that big a deal, 5 pages, waiting for 5 pages, it's not that big a deal. That low stake decision to help can be triggered relatively easily just by giving any reason for choosing one thing rather than another. It doesn't even have to be a good reason. And this is something I observed all the time at Procter Gamble. So let me give you an example of a low stakes decision. When a consumer goes into a supermarket to buy a shampoo, and let's say it's Pantene, one of the key shampoos for Procter & Gamble, chances are, as much as we wish that the only brand they possibly wanted was Pantene, normally what happens is there's 3 or 4 brands, typically 3, that they think are round about as good as each other. So you might have the Sunsilk, whatever the L'Oreal brand is, and the P&G brand. And so between those 3 brands, choosing one or the other is not really a very high stakes decision. If they're out of stock on Pantene and I take Sunsilk, typically might be mildly disappointed, probably not. They're about the same equivalency. So how can I nudge people to choose my shampoo in place of another? And the answer is just give them a small reason to choose. It might be 10% off, it might be 15%, 20% off. Now, you might think that people are choosing your product because you gave them 20% off, and logically that relates to them saving money. But that's not true. You see, I stop people, and I ran research where we stop people at the end of supermarket aisles and we ask them, why did you buy this brand over the other? And their answer was, well, it's 20% off. But then they couldn't answer my next question, which was, how much does it cost? You see, making that decision to buy that shampoo instead of the other is triggered by there being a reason. The reason didn't have to be such a good one because they didn't actually know what the price was in the first place. The second thing we've learned here is that the higher the cost or the stakes involved or the effort or the inconvenience to the person being asked, the higher they will scrutinize the request you're making. When we said we have 5 pages, can I use the photocopier because I have to make copies? People weren't really properly evaluating that reason because it was a small enough request. When we said, okay, can I please have go ahead of you because I've got 20 pages, all of a sudden the brain wakes up and says, wow, hang on, that's a little bit more of that's a bit of an ask. What is the reason that they're asking for? Now, in the book, I summarize this using this particular ratio, and I'm not implying that people actually make a calculation in their heads, right? What I'm saying is this is a model that you can use to conceptualize and to apply this understanding. The likelihood somebody says no goes up when the inconvenience to them goes up, and it goes down when the importance of the reason goes up. So the smaller this fraction becomes, the higher the likelihood they'll say yes. Let me explain that again because it might be a little bit confusing. They're more likely to say no when the cost of the request is high and the importance of the reason is low. They're more likely to say yes when the cost of the request is small and the importance of the reason is high. But you can use either the importance of the reason, the emotional, the beneficial side, or the effort involved in the request in order to influence people to be more likely to do what you're asking. And to give you an example of that, this played out very clearly in a study about influencing people to be energy efficient. In this study in the UK, the goal was to influence people to adopt energy efficiency and energy saving messages. And so they used, measures in their house. And so they used messages like you might expect. Saving energy is good for the planet, saving energy costs you less, saving energy can earn you points. And what this research in the UK found is more than 2/3 of people were not persuaded to adopt energy efficiency measures in their home by the use of logical reasons like saving money, saving energy, being more environmentally friendly. They were far more likely to adopt the energy efficiency measures in their home if they were told that the measures could be installed without causing them any inconvenience. It needed to be easy. If it's easy to do, if the cost or the effort or the inconvenience or the problem it causes me is low, sometimes the willingness to comply can be triggered without there even being a very good reason at all. People are willing to do things that don't take a lot of effort on their behalf. And so I summarize all of this again in Principle 5, which is the effort involved or inconvenience or cost to the other person of the request you're making. And Principle 5 is all about the fact that you should, if you find you've got a very low compliance rate, let's say in adopting a procedure or completing a form or filling out a survey or questionnaire or responding to an email, having people in your company adopt a new process, then rather than think in terms of how can I force them to do it or how can I control their behavior, instead take the opposite approach, which is how can I make this so very easy and convenient for them to do, because as the cost or the request or the effort involved in doing something drops, people's willingness to do it goes up. Now, the visual that I use for representing Principle 5 is this. Pushing a button is easy. You can get people to do that almost without explanation. Pushing a boulder uphill is difficult. Which one of these things are you asking people to do for you? And it is a strange occurrence that we observe in the workplace all the time, that people make large effort and inconvenience requests of people who have very little inclination to help. The number of requests I get from people that I maybe taught 5 years ago in a class of 75 and I barely remember them and they've never interacted with me since, and they write to me and ask me to give them a reference letter, and what they also ask me to do is, here's a link to the job description, read the job description, work out what in my past meets the job description, and please write the reference letter for me. That's a massive amount of work for me in response to an email that took them about 10 seconds to write. So you can imagine what my response normally is in those cases. Okay, so we've looked at Principle 6, we've looked at Principle 5. A couple of last things I just want to highlight about this particular approach, which is the working with influence approach to increasing your influence over people and outcomes in the workplace. The very first aspect I want to highlight here is that the influencing attempts that you make by using the principles in this book should be neither forceful nor unethical. This book is not about controlling other people's behavior. There is literally no ethical way to control what other people do. I don't even know if there's any legal ways to control what people do, right? You can kidnap them and brainwash them. That's not going to build your social capital at work. So when you take the working with influence approach, what we're essentially doing is getting an understanding of behavioral science to recognize what influences how people make decisions, what draws their attention, how they perceive your argument or your project, how they evaluate whether it's worthy of resources or not. And you tap into that understanding of the subconscious processes going around working in the environment around you, and you apply that understanding to tip things in your favor. It does not mean that you are going to get exactly what you're after every single time, because we're not controlling people's behavior. But what it does mean is that the argument you're presenting, the way you're presenting it, who you're presenting it to, when you modify your approach to include these tools from behavioral science, you will increase your success rate in influencing people and outcomes at work above and relative to what it was before, whether your starting position is a 2 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10. Furthermore, often your influencing attempts won't even be visible because you're just tapping into subconscious effects or factors that are, or what decision-making processes that are happening inside that person's head that they can't even perceive. So your influencing attempt is not forceful, it's not unethical, it's often not even visible, but it does increase your chances of getting the outcome that you're after. The second key approach that I want to highlight about this particular model for influence, the working with influence model, is that when you implement influencing attempts using the principles from this book, your work should build your social capital rather than borrow from it. When you are attempting to apply these techniques, they should not only help you to gain more influence over decisions and outcomes at work, they should also be building your relationships, your ability to collaborate, your communication, and frankly, making people feel better about working with you. And so the icon I use for this is, you know, when you're in a video game and your avatar has this like life bar above its head, and the more blows that you take from the troll or the monster or whatever, your life expectancy goes down. So I want you to think of a bar like that and think of it as your social capital. Your social capital, you should never be borrowing from it by pleading, begging, manipulating in order to get the outcome you're after. You should be able to achieve the dual goal of influencing situations by using an understanding of behavioral science and improving your relationships and your social connection with people at the same time by using these approaches. And then just finally, to give you an overview of the model itself, there are 9 principles. As you might know from Miller's Law, 9 is the sort of maximum number of meaningful chunks of information we can carry in our short-term memory. But in order to increase your ability to remember the principles, I've divided them into meaningful chunks, which is a technique for improving memory. So of the 9 principles, they're divided into 3 groups of 3. The first 3 principles, and hence the first 3 chapters of the book, are people-related. So these principles are about, principle 1 is status, which is understanding where you rank subconsciously within a group of people and what you can do to help your voice be heard in a situation where you are junior or less experienced. Principle 2 is about the unseen influence of community and understanding how social imitation factors affect decision making. Principle 3 I've called, is it better to be a lovable fool or a competent jerk, which is about the relative effects of competence and relationship in the workplace. And it helps you understand how people think in a sort of tribalistic way and how you can take steps to help other people feel that you are on their tribe and part of their group and within their community and on their team. Help them feel that, and they will be more positively inclined towards you. The next 3 sets of principles are perception related. So if the first set are related to who you're interacting with, the second set are, these principles are related to how you structure your message, what you ask for, how you ask for it. Principle 4 is about value framing, and it's about the human tendency to make judgments in relative rather than absolute terms, and therefore about the values, the currencies, and the analogies you use when you communicate your message. Principle 5 is about really reducing the effort involved to the other person to the minimal of what you need. The more you reduce the effort or inconvenience to other people, the more likely people will comply. And principle 6 is about suspending your usual approach to using rational, logical reasons and coming up with better reasons. The third set of principles are all related to how you behave and what you do when you execute your influencing attempt, for example, at a big presentation or a meeting or in front of a client or in a job interview. Principle 6 is called inertia, and I've borrowed a phrase from Bruce Lee there. Bruce Lee said, "Be like water, and rather than try to fight the flow of the water, use it in a powerful way." And so in Principle 7, what we're talking about there is understanding what people are most likely to do, and instead of trying to control and change that, using your understanding to your advantage to help influence the outcome. Principle 8 is really about the fact that it's very easy to get people into small, meaningless competitions and battles and to have them fighting and for you to get distracted and for you to be thinking about other things. but I've called it end goal focus, what you really, really want. By defining the key thing that you're after and focusing your energy against that, again, it makes it more likely that you arrive at that destination. And then finally, execution. The final 100 meters of a marathon is what I'm using as an example. Once you have done all of this clever thinking, the words you use, how you speak, how you hold yourself, these things significantly impact how influential you are. And today we really, really just scraped the surface of principles 5 and 6. I hope that just by scraping that surface, you've already been able to come up with some action steps, some things you can do. And as I say, I want to highlight, you do not need to read that book cover to cover. I would love if you do. I think it'll give you a lot of value if you do. But realistically, you can dive into one chapter or even half a chapter, come away with some action steps that you can start implementing in your business and in your life tomorrow. Honestly, I recommend taking some step and reading some amount instead of reading no amount and taking no step, right? Expertise develops incremental step by incremental step. I hope you enjoy the book. You're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find. There is no other Amanda Nimon-Peters in the world. So you're welcome to find me on LinkedIn. And if you have questions while you are going through the chapters, you're not sure how to apply something, or you want to tell me about an example of something you did that worked really well, please reach out to me, send your questions. I'm on LinkedIn probably almost on a daily basis. I hope you've enjoyed the talk today, and I'm very happy to answer your questions.